Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal akhirin. Nabiyyana Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, this is another opportunity for us to reflect upon what has happened in the past, in the history of Islam, in the light of the present. And this is critical, that all of the information that we are looking at is not history for history's sake, but it is looking at the experiences of the Muslims, the experience of the scholars, what transpired in order to better understand what is happening today. And we understood that in this issue of reform and resistance, or you could say revival and resistance, this is a phenomenon within Islam, that when certain circumstances arise, there's a natural response. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful to this nation to rise up different individuals and movements in order to meet these challenges. We recognize that historically there are different contexts that bring about the need for islah, a reform or repair, and a need for resistance, that we resist the evil. One, there are political changes. And we understood historically that there were great changes that went on right after the death of the Prophet ﷺ in the transition to the Khulafa al-Rashidin, and then when it changed from the rightly guided caliphs into the dynastic rule. And that is when it became from Khilafah to Mulk, to the time of the Umayyads and to the time of the Abbasids. So when this came about, there was some turmoil, there was some confusion. And so there needed to be repair done for the Ummah in order to continue to spread the message, continue to enable Muslims to live in this world as believers, even though they were under a different rule. Following that, we saw invasions coming into the Muslim world. The Mongols came. The Crusaders came. Later on, there were European powers, the colonial powers, that came into the Muslim world. And so there was a need for an internal change amongst us, and also a need to resist these powers. In terms of our internal self, and that is critical, because we know that Allah tells us, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change that which is in themselves. And so when the disparities between the rich and the poor, when the ruling class separate themselves from the masses of the people, then there is a need to repair the society. That's going away from the Sunnah. We also recognize that when materialism becomes the main theme and not the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where people neglect their religious principles, then there is a need for islah. There is a need for repair in the Muslim world. Another challenge that has faced us historically over the centuries is the rise of different sectarian groups, the many different schisms and isms and breakaway, not only just the Sunni and the Shia, but also the Khawarij, those who went outside of everybody, and then little groups that came along with strange type of understandings. And that happened as a base because of the ego of individuals, and also because of the different cultures that Islam had actually entered into. And so there was a need to revive Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ said at the head of every century, there would be a mujaddid. There would be one who would revive the faith. And that tajdeed is similar to the islah, the repair, the revival, the reform. There are individuals who are risen up from our people who take this strong position. And so we want to look at some of these individuals in the light of how Allah manifested them and then how they used their Allah-given qualities in order to make the change. And so tonight we want to look at Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And he is a well-known Hanbali scholar, focusing mainly on the madhab of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. He was familiar with other different groups, but to be honest and fair, when the word Shaykh al-Islam is being used, and that's a higher position, you have scholars, you have Shaykh, you have Allah. When you say Shaykh al-Islam, you're saying that person is taking in all of the different aspects within the school of thought. Now, sometimes it's used, or it's really never used, to mean everybody, every single thing. If you go back to the beginning, of course, when there weren't schools of thought, then you had scholars who basically knew all the sources. But when the Ummah had separated, had gone through tremendous changes, schools of thought were developed in order for the masses to be able to come in. So Ibn Taymiyyah was born in a very chaotic situation. It was the time of the Mongol invasion. And we know that the Mongols, when they came into the Muslim world, they brought about a destruction never heard of before. To the point where some of the scholars thought, is this Ya'juj and Ma'juj? Is this Gog and Magog? Is this really the signs of the last days? And so that was a chaotic time, and it needed firm scholarship. It needed vision. It needed resistance to come out of the calamity that Muslims found themselves in. There was also the Crusaders. And the Crusaders came in waves out of Europe into the Muslim world, taking over land, causing confusion, conquering Jerusalem. And so he was born in this chaotic period there. And his family itself, he was brought up in a place called Harran. And Harran is in present-day Turkey, but those lines were drawn by European colonialists. It's really Turkey, Syria, Iraq. It's sort of a point that connects all three of those countries. But the historical context is that the Mongols had sacked Baghdad. And this is 1258. And confusion was happening. People were running in all directions. At the same time, a group rose up of Central Asian origin who were ex-slave soldiers, mercenaries, brought into the Muslim world. They were originally from Central Asia, Circassia, itself known as the Mamluks. And the Mamluks began to govern in Egypt. Because of their strength, they put a stop to the Mongol advance and became the leading force in the Muslim world. But after a period of time, and again, this is where Ibn Khaldun's theory about like few generations. So it takes, a generation, then the next one. And if there's no revival, sometimes you actually have corruption setting in. And so they were infamous for over heavy taxation and straining the population. In terms of what was happening in the Muslim world at that time as well, we find that Muslims started to break into different groups. And because of Islam entering into area where Buddhism was, where Hinduism, where Christianity, traditional religion, there was an emphasis in these ways of life on saints and on special gurus and special individuals. And so when people came into Islam through these different ways of life, they brought with them their cultural traditions. And in many cases, they weren't able to take in enough Islam. And so you find that their Islam, although it is very clear that it's Tawheed, is the belief in one God, that all the prophets are human beings, but still this exaggeration with the scholars came into the Muslim world heavy during this time. Also because of the pressure that was on Muslims and the distance and the lack of communications, the ability to communicate long distances, a type of intellectual stagnation came about. And that is what you could call taqlid, which is a type of blind imitation. And so the Hanbali school, the Maliki, the Shafi'i, the Hanafi, people began to follow their scholars and their school of thought as though that was the religion itself. And they weren't in touch in many cases with people from the other schools of thought because it was dynasties that took on these schools of thought. And so you'll see the Hanafi scholars there in the land of the Seljuks, in Persia, in Turkey, in these areas. You see Shafi'i scholars in Egypt, and then down into Yemen and in Indonesia. You see Maliki scholars in North Africa, in Al-Andalus. You will see Hanbali scholars in Arabia and in the Gulf and in Syria itself. And so people began to cling on to their schools of thought in an extreme way. And so enter Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. His name was Taqiyuddin Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdus Salam. And he was born in this area of Harran. And in 1268, Mongols conquered 1258. They were coming through. So Harran is not Baghdad. It's going toward what is now Turkey. And so by 1268, that's 10 years, his family, they had to flee. And so they fled from Harran and ended up in Damascus itself, finding themselves in an intellectual and cultural center that had been dominated by the Mamluks. And he was born in a family of scholars. This is the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that certain individuals were raised up in a particular way, and Allah blessed them with the right circumstances. So Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he came from a family of Hanbali scholars. Okay, so his father, Shaykh Abdul Halim Ibn Taymiyyah, was a great Hanbali scholar, the head of the Sukkariya madrasa in Damascus. And so much of his early education was coming right through this madrasa. But his father's father, Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah, he was also a scholar. So he's in this environment, a scholarly environment. And that is an advantage for a young man, because many of the distractions that people may have will not affect somebody who's in an environment like this. Their whole world is really based upon this scholarship. Also, the fact that within Damascus itself were some of the greatest libraries and archives and halaqat, the academic circles in the whole of the Muslim world. And so it was a vibrant time. It was a time where a person who was oriented in the right way could actually flourish. And this is important to understand this individual who brought about a type of islah that is hard to really repeat. And again, we're not dealing with the Khulafa al-Rashidin. We're not dealing with the Tabi'een. We are now in another time period. We looked at many of those great scholars in the previous semester. Ibn Taymiyyah was blessed with a sharp intellect. He also had a photographic memory. And that is a great blessing, where a person can literally look at a page and it becomes like a book inside of his head. And so, because of this and the scholarly family around him, the teachers in all different disciplines, he was in the perfect position to become a well-rounded scholar. So he flourished in theology, fiqh, jurisprudence, Arabic, history, theology. He was flourishing in all types of subjects. So to look at his mastery, and again, when I say Shaykh al-Islam, it's really Shaykh al-Islam of the Hanbalis, okay? Because he was not a total master of Maliki fiqh or Shafi'i fiqh. He was introduced to a lot of the Hanafi fiqh, but he could not be considered a Shaykh al-Islam there. Hanbali fiqh, he was on top of it. And so he mastered Quranic studies, memorization, interpretation of the Quran. He mastered hadith sciences, analyzing the chains of transmission, the reliability of the narrators. Fiqh, he was a master of the Hanbali approach to fiqh, and he became familiar with other schools of thought, and you will see that in his writings as well. Master in Arabic language and grammar. His Arabic is impeccable. He's speaking and thinking in Fusha, in classical. And what he also did, because of his ability to read, he started reading everything. And by that time, remember Baghdad, there were philosophical books. There were all types of information translated into Arabic. And so he was taking in all of this information. And so by his 20s, he was literally a qualified scholar, known for his ability, his eloquence. But the flip side to him, Allah knows best the good or the bad, is that he is so sharp in his criticisms and his thinking. He became controversial as well, because he would not hold back. He would speak straightforward, and he would, because of that, encounter opposition. And that's important to know about Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Many people, they hear his name and they just think about opposition. They think he's a negative scholar who's attacking everybody. No. The basis of his teachings is that he was focusing on Tawheed. That is the essence of his revival, his Islah. He wanted to bring the people back into the belief in one God. That is the essence of the message itself, obviously. That's the kalima la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What had happened in his time, and again, he's relevant to his time. This is how you know when the scholar is really somebody who is bringing about Islah. He's not taking you back 200 years. He's not misinterpreting your culture, but he's actually dealing with your issues, the issues of your time. And that's what we need today, because the Muslim world is all over the place now, with different schools of thought, different Islamic movements, and there is a need of Islah, a general repair of the Muslim world. That's the internal change that we need to be able to come as an ummah, because that ummah consciousness is critical for us at this point when the world is now turning against us. And so, because of the deterioration of Tawheed in the Muslim world at that time, he was focusing on opposing grave worship, the veneration of saints. And that's something that it sounds strange, because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made it clear about grave worshipping the graves. He made it clear, even on his deathbed. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was coming out of his fever and saying, don't make my grave a house of worship. Don't do to me what the Christians and the Jews did to their prophets. Don't do this to me. He was trying to make it clear. When they asked him, who are you? Describe yourself. He said, I'm the son of one of your women. Humility. Okay? And that is to strengthen the Tawheed. And so he tried to make it clear to people that when you're spending too much time venerating saints, raising them up to the high level, then this causes confusion. And I can remember coming into one of the Muslim countries. I don't want to say which country it was, but I came into this city, one of the ancient cities of Islam, and I came toward the big masjid, and it was like a Hindu bazaar, although it was a Muslim land. And when I came in, just by the door was a grave. And the people were around the grave, and they were kissing it and praying to it, and Hindus were there too. And amidst this uproar, or this fanfare happening around the grave, they called the adhan for Asr. And only a few people left the grave and actually went to make Salat al-Asr. The other ones continued at the grave. So this is a rampant problem within the Muslim world. And unless we are able to deal with this, unless we are able to straighten up our Tawheed, our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how can we expect to get out of the confusion that we are living in this world today? Also, what had happened is, during his time, is that a lot of innovations came in. And when we use the word bid'ah, bid'ah does not mean something new. For instance, if you call the adhan with a microphone, that's not a bid'ah. If you're driving a car instead of riding a camel, that's not an innovation. It is a physical innovation, but bid'ah is really where you are changing the religion itself. You're introducing something into the religion that does not have a basis in the Quran and the Sunnah. So there's no basis for this. That's the bid'ah that he's talking about. So he rejected the extreme practices. And one of the groups in Tasawwuf, and this is one of his clashes, the people of Tasawwuf, the extreme ones. Because I want to make it clear from the writings when you go back in that time, and I was surprised to see he communicated with Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah, who's known as one of the great scholars of Tasawwuf. They were colleagues of each other. They disagreed on certain points, but they were not enemies in the sense of how some people are dealing today. And so he would accept the people of Tasawwuf if they were within the boundaries of Quran and Sunnah. And that is really the balanced approach that we need to be dealing with all different groups and all different persuasions in Islam. He put some emphasis on Asma wa Sifat, the names and descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he emphasized, and again, you have to know the time period he's living in, because he's living in a time where there are groups like the Mu'tazila that took in European philosophy and started changing many things around, and there was some extreme groups. So therefore, he emphasized the fact that we should accept the names, descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should not change them, add to them. We should not put our opinion in if we don't have something from Quran and Sunnah. We should not make, anthropomorphism, which is, making Allah like a creature on earth, having hands like a human being or eyes like no. He was really clear on this. So this theological stance that he took it is known by many as Athari. It is an Athari Aqidah position. And its emphasis is to go back to the early Islamic creed, along with the changes in society, but in terms of our faith, that we would try to be faithful and honest to the original teachings of Islam. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah also found that in the area of legality, fiqh, there was a stagnation that went on. And people were literally stuck in their schools of thought. And this taqleed is dangerous. I can recall even a brother coming to me and saying, can a Hanafi marry a Shafi? And he was serious. So these are madhabs, schools of thought in Sunnah, and he wants to know, can a Hanafi marry a Shafi? We're not, and I told him, we're not Christians, we're not Catholics and Protestants, and these scholars were teachers and students of each other. So this is far away from our understanding. But when you get too far in taqleed, blind imitation, then it becomes almost like another religion. So literally, you have people at different points in time, and even during our times, where we got so fanatical that people would not pray behind another imam because he's from a different school of thought. This is within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They will not, even though the Sunnah allowed different ways of doing things, and it's Sunnah, they take their school of thought over the Sunnah. You see? What is wrong? And I remember traveling and going to a masjid, and the imam read so beautiful, it was Maghrib Salat, and he said, Wala Daleen, and I said, Ameen, and I was the only person in the masjid. And so they came after they made their taslim, they said, where's that shaitan? And so they came to me, surrounded me, and they said, why? And I said, get Bukhari hadith. And they got the hadith, and it showed that the Sahaba said, Ameen, so loud, it shook the building. They said, we never knew this. But they were blindly following the information and thought that I was actually a shaitan. I was trying to disrupt the masjid, but I was only doing the sunnah. And so one of the things that Ibn Taymiyyah did was he called for a revival of ijtihad. And that is making religious decisions, dealing with specific issues in specific environment, and it requires, a strong knowledge of that individual, of the sources. They have to also understand what is happening in their world. Okay, and so that was crucial at that time, with the world going through so many changes, Mongols, Crusaders, and it's really crucial today in the changes that we have gone through as well in this world, with our countries divided up, with the confusion that's happening in the Muslim world. Ijtihad. Open up your mind. And there's nothing wrong with having a school of thought. But if you see something that another Muslim is doing based on Sunnah, there's nothing wrong with following that. Everybody will have a school of thought. You have to pray in a particular way. Okay, and if you're in an area where people are predominantly Hanafi or predominantly Maliki, the enlightened scholars will say, follow along with that school of thought. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay, but let us keep our minds open in the way that we're supposed to in looking at the broad aspects of the Sunnah. One of the beautiful things about Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he was not just an intellectual. So he's not just dealing with theoretical things, but he was dealing with real live issues. And that had to do with the governments that were ruling over the Muslim world. And so he challenged the laws that were being set up. He challenged taxation. And that's something really serious. And he said that if your taxes go against the Quran and the Sunnah, change it. That's a very serious thing to do for a scholar. He even criticized rulers. He criticized other scholars, especially when the scholars and the rulers used the deen, they used Islam in order to justify their oppression. Now that's something we need today, because there are individuals, unfortunately, amongst us who will even try to use aspects of the deen to oppress other Muslims. Ibn Taymiyyah took a strong stance against that. And so, to look at this social reform, it's an amazing thing. And really, we need to reflect on this. Our scholars, our next generation has to have this type of spirit of Islah. This revival is so much needed. He criticized corruption on the government level. He held the rulers accountable for their responsibility to uphold Sharia, Islamic law, to ensure the well-being of their subjects. He held them accountable. And that's so important to us today. An example was with the Mamluks, who had imposed heavy taxes upon people because they were into the military thing. So they started taxing people heavily. This had to be opposed. And that's not easy, because the Mamluks generally solve everything with the sword. But Ibn Taymiyyah took a strong stance. He was also very much in favor of the oppressed. And not only the Muslims, the rights of all minority groups. He even defended the rights of Christian communities who, under Muslim rule, were being mistreated. And so this is a broad-based scholar. And that's the kind of Islah or repair that we need today. And so he took a stance politically, you could actually say. On a spiritual level, and this is one of his greatest achievements, sincerity, the ikhlas, to be sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That our morality, the things that we do in our life, need to be similar to what we say. Spirituality is not just a phony thing, not on special occasions. It's something that we do constantly. And so he critiqued the extreme amongst the people of Tasawwuf, and especially when they were going out of line. And this is a controversy up until today, but he was very clear, and his proofs are very clear, that this wahdat al-wujud, this hulul, that when it is said that Allah is in everything. And so some people up until today still say, you ask them, where is Allah? They say, everywhere. So Allah is in the trees, Allah is all around, everywhere. This is the hulul. This is really a Buddhist concept. This takes you back to Zoroastrianism. It's like, for the young people, it's like Star Wars. It's like the Force. Luke Skywalker. The Force can be good or the Force can be evil. And Luke is taught by Yoda. He's taught by his Buddhist monk. You see how they do? He taught him, feel the Force. It's everywhere. Control it. You see this concept? That's wahdatul wujud. That is not an Islamic concept, because we believe, and it is clear, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above the seven heavens, and that if something of the majesty of Allah were revealed, it would destroy everything inside of this world. And so, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he emphasized personal accountability, that we are first accountable ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our sincerity in our worship, our dependence, tawakkul, that we need to depend upon Allah. And he spent a lot of time also in tazkiyah. And tazkiyah is tasawwuf, that is ihsan. And he spent a lot of time, and much of his life he was imprisoned. And, he is very clearly known to be that when he's in prison, he's saying, like, I am actually liberated in the prison. Highly spiritual person as well. And so this type of spiritual thinking did not separate him from his intellect. And so this is where he's dealing with issues that would even be considered secular in a sense, because you're dealing with philosophies and science and whatnot. But no, he was very clear in dealing with the philosophies of the world, whether the Greek, the Roman, Persian philosophy, whatever it is, that our philosophy is based on Quran and Sunnah. And this is very much in line with the position of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal rahimahullah and the stance that he took with the Mu'tazila, who were bringing in this Greek and Roman philosophy. He took a very clear stance. If it's not based on Quran and Sunnah, then throw it out. I'm not going to change the religion. And so what Ibn Taymiyyah was asking for is a type of unified curriculum, epistemology, it's a big word, a unified curriculum. And that is what we need today. Because in many cases you have Islamic schools where you study your Islamic subjects and then you study your secular subjects. But what is needed now, the great challenge in front of our scholars, is to have a united curriculum whereby the student is studying the Quran and they're also studying mathematics. They study hadith and they're also studying chemistry. You see, it's a united curriculum because we recognize that Allah is the one who has power over all things. And so that is another great repair that he was bringing in, repairing the Muslim world. And that is so much needed today because we're going to have to break away from the colonial curriculums, the colonial secular way of compartmentalizing the world. That is going to be one of our great challenges. And so this revival of Ibn Taymiyyah is the spirit that is needed today. And what is so beautiful about this scholar is that he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the talk. He was for real, as we would say. And he actually resisted the Mongols physically. So remember, his family had to leave Haran. Mongols sacked Baghdad, they're moving in. They had to go to Damascus. And so Ibn Taymiyyah was part of that resistance against the Mongols, not only just with his fatwas, but also with his body. And so he was literally fighting against the Mongols. And there were some Mongols, those Berke Khan who were in Russia, and then scattered ones in different groups who had embraced Islam. Okay, but Ibn Taymiyyah made it very clear that you separate Islamic Sharia from the Yasa, which is the Mongol law. And some of the Mongols said they were Muslim, but they still based their law upon the Mongolian law. He said, no. We have to have Islamic law. We have to go all the way. And so I remember one fatwa that was coming in, and this is concerning drugs. So, and that's something today which is causing confusion in our lands, intoxication. But he took a really strong stance. Because the Mongols, when they passed through India, they came across hemp, hashish, and they were carrying it along country to country, opium, hashish. And so they would literally conquer a population, and then they would make them drug addicts. So you could say they were the first international drug dealers. But Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he took a strong stand. He made one fatwa that if somebody is caught selling drugs, transporting and selling these drugs, that person should be executed and not buried in an Islamic grave. That's serious. But that's the stance that he took. And so he fought and made his stance. Because of this, he had a great influence on scholars in his time and after his time. He wrote over 500 works. I don't know where he got the time or the ability. 500. Remember, photographic memory, well-rounded, his Majmu' al-Fatawa, so many books, Kitab al-Iman, Al-Aqidat al-Wasatiyah. These are still being used up until today. But because of the stance that he took, he was imprisoned. He had 3 major imprisonments. And because he ruffled people, he was very strong against the people who were going overboard with the saints, worshiping at the graves. He said no, he took a stance against this. And because of this, he was put into the prison, sometimes even not allowed to have a pen to be able to write. But he taught orally. And he continued until he actually died while he was imprisoned. So this is a real scholar who gave his life, gave everything that he possibly had. So some of the key takeaways or lessons from Ibn Taymiyyah and his revival. Number one is the centrality of Tawheed. So he based his revival on the core beliefs of Islam and the fundamentals. Secondly, he had a holistic approach. His reforms was not only theology, it was law, governance, spirituality. He wanted to bring in a comprehensive system because Islam was being broken up in the minds of individuals. He also stressed on having a practical application of Islam. Real world issues. Not just dealing intellectually out in space, but dealing with the real world on the ground. And his courage and his integrity, he will be known for this and for the great repair and islah that he was able to bring about. Again, I leave you with this concept, and Ibn Taymiyyah, for some people, may have been a very strange individual if you had thousands of grave worshippers, and then he takes a stance. But the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna al-Islam bada ghariban wa sayaudu ghariban fatuba lil-ghuraba." Islam began strange and it will return to being strange. So glad tidings to the strangers. And they asked him, "O Messenger of Allah, وَمَا الْغُرَبَاء?" Who are these strangers? He said, "Alladhina yuslihuna inda fasad an-nas." They are those who repair and rectify society when the people have become corrupted. And Sadaqa Rasulullah, Islah. That's your repair, that's your revival. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, was one of those great revivers. We are in need of this repair and revival today in this chaotic world that Muslims are going throughout the planet. So I leave you with these thoughts, and I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have. Floor is open.
Okay, I have a question. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Quick. It seems as if Ibn Taymiyyah is a scholar whose works have either been selectively cited or interpreted by those who claim to follow his aqidah as being too literary.
For those who claim that what? Again? Say that again?
Interpreted by those who claim to follow his aqidah as being too literalistic.
Yeah, so what is happening is that names of individuals, many of the famous scholars of the past, are misunderstood unless you really go back and understand the scholar. Like, for instance, Imam al-Ghazali, right? People will say, Ghazali was, he was into tasawwuf and he was out in space. And what Imam Ghazali was the Sheikh al-Islam. He was the greatest scholar probably in the whole Muslim world at the time. So you got to look at his whole life. And Ibn Taymiyyah wrote 500 works. So it was all, he wrote spirituality, philosophies, law, governance, all types of different areas. There are some people today who take a certain section of his writings and focus on that as though that's the only thing that he wrote. This is a misunderstanding of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, although his stance is very clear and he is emphasizing as much purity as possible in Tawheed, in our belief. And I believe that is very essential today in the world we are in. Floor is open for any other questions.
It's certainly evident that such criticism don't come with thoughtful reading of his text. Should we read his text to understand better?
That this criticism,
It's certainly evident that such criticism don't come with a thoughtful reading of his text.
right? So the people who do not read his text in a thoughtful way, and also read his other books as well. 500 books he's got. So to have be more balanced in terms of who he was and what he actually brought. Many people don't even, they hear the name, but they don't even know the context that he lived in. So when you understand the context that he lived in, then you can see his emphasis on certain points. Okay? So this is critical in understanding any scholar and what he actually did. So again, this is an important lesson for us. And we are looking for those scholars who took stance in their society. They repaired the condition of Muslims. They resisted the evil that was around them. Nobody is perfect except Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes people get rigid, controversial, but we take the best out of our scholars and we pray that Allah will forgive them. So have a safe journey home. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.